Why, hello again. You're still continuing these notes. Well, that's so good of you, okay? Today we're going to move on to the next section, and we're going to talk about characters. We're going to talk about characters today, okay? It's going to be really, really simple. So, if you guys have watched the previous video, you know that all of my stuff for setting is right down there. I could have spaced that out, but yeah, whatever. Let's flip to a new page. Now this new page, keep in mind, is still Elements of Literature, so we are going to want to title the page Elements of Lit. And today we are going to talk about characters. There is a fair amount of information about characters, so you're probably going to want at least maybe half the page for this one. Okay, let's start off simple. If you guys remember in the previous videos, we've talked about what characters are a little bit, and we've also filled it out on the reference guide. So I know just right off the bat that characters are going to be the agents that drive the story forward. So what you want to say is agents, specifically the word agents, not people, because sometimes characters are not people. The agents that drive the story. They're the agents that drive the story. Good. Okay. Now, in my classroom, I usually have like a little activity where I have my kids like label the characters that are down there. So, in case you don't know, which you should, in order of appearance, you have Luke Skywalker. You have Neo from The Matrix, which, if you've never seen The Matrix, that is him. That is a movie that we watch in my class because it is amazing. Everyone should watch that movie. You have Wally from Wall-E because everyone knows Wall-E. And then you have a character named V, okay? If you don't know who V is a character from this movie, V for Vendetta. It is also a comic book. He is a comic book hero, I believe, in the DC universe. So he's kind of an anti-hero because he's kind of crazy. But it's a guy who was tortured by the government, and so he wears a Guy Fawkes mask. And he's basically like on this whole revenge story to try and get back at the people who tortured him. So he's an anti-hero. He does things the wrong way because revenge. All right? Anyway, good movie. You should go watch it on Netflix if your parents will let you. Or if you're already old, like me. Okay, characters. Really, really simple. Don't freak out. There is a lot of information on this slide, and I will zoom in on it so you guys can take a look too. Okay? First thing that you're going to have is the protagonist. The protagonist of your story, or if you were in my class today, then I joked around with my kids and said, oh yeah, it's pronounced protagonist. The protagonist is going to be your primary leading character. The protagonist is your primary leading character. I never enjoyed when I always had teachers that would be like, oh yeah, the protagonist is your hero of the story. Well, I mean, I guess, but you know, what if like Darth Vader is your protagonist? What if you wrote a book from Darth Vader's perspective? Darth Vader or Anakin Skywalker literally murdered a room full of children with a lightsaber. That doesn't make him a hero. So you don't want to say it's the hero of the story. I think it's a kind of a cheesy definition. What you want to say is the protagonist is the primary leading character, and that has no indication on whether or not the character is good or bad, but it has everything to do with whether or not they are the most important. Now, moving on, I'm just going to create a little bullet point right there, and that's where I'm going to continue. Moving on, we have the deuteragonist. It's not a word you hear very often in school. The deuteragonist is a secondary most important character. So your protagonist is the primary character. The deuteragonist is the secondary most important character. Okay. I'm going to continue on that note here. Now, something that I am changing from my PowerPoint slide, because my PowerPoint slide is a little outdated, there's another term here that I really, really would encourage you to write down, and that's character foil. On the PowerPoint slide, I said a character foil I said usually the person is a character foil to the protagonist, like a best bro. But I'm actually going to give that definition here. So write down character foil. Okay, just like that. Now, a character foil, okay? Here's the thing. Your protagonist in a story probably has flaws, or they probably have shortcomings, because that makes characters interesting. You wouldn't want a character to be perfect because that would be boring, right? Think about like Batman. You know, Batman is an incredible superhero. He has all of the wealth, he has all of the strength, he has the mental fortitude, he has the detective skills and things like that. But there are certain things that he doesn't have. For example, if you have ever played Batman Arkham Knight, which is the latest in the Arkham Asylum video games, here's a picture. One of the things that happens in that story is that Batman needs help from other people. And one of the things that he is terrible at doing is asking for help. So you have these things called character foils, okay? A character foil is supposed to be a character that can mirror or balance out somebody else in the story. Now, the example that I gave in class today would be like with Harry Potter. Harry Potter is just honestly a really, really easy example to work with, because you have the main characters, Ron, Harry, and Hermione, right? Now, in Harry Potter, Harry is the chosen one, and everyone loves to point it out. And Harry is supposed to be the one to save the world. Wow, magical. But even he himself like understands that that whole prophecy thing probably isn't as like special as everyone makes it out to be. And Harry openly admits in the book series that he's not that great of a wizard. You know, when compared to Hermione, Hermione is absolutely intelligent and strong-willed and everything like that. And so he relies on people like Ron and Hermione in order to get the job done. Now, that would mean that Ron and Hermione are character foils for Harry. Keep in mind, however, that Hermione herself is not perfect. She's not a perfect witch, and she uses Harry as a character foil. Her biggest flaw is that she is not a risk taker. And so most of the time, whenever the kids are in a situation where they have to break school rules, Harry is the one who's like, YOLO, let's do this, right? And Hermione is just like reluctantly going along with it because she doesn't want Harry to die. You know, that's a thing. So anyway, a character foil, what is it? It is a character. It doesn't have to be the deuteragonist, just so you know. It is a character who is going to... who mirrors / balances another character. I ran out of room. I think you get the point. Yeah. That's about as good as I can get it. I'm sorry. So a character foil is a character who mirrors or balances out another character. I gave another example today. Let's do it this way. If you want to talk about Star Wars, okay, in Star Wars, you have Kylo Ren and Rey. So Rey and Kylo Ren are characters that initially hate each other, and they both have strengths and weaknesses. For example, Kylo Ren is very emotional, and Rey is very emotionally controlled. So they balance each other out that way. Also, Rey is kind of relatively super strong, and Kylo Ren doesn't really understand her power or where she got it from and things like that. And so Kylo Ren struggles to maintain his appearance and his strength and everything. So that also kind of works. Another example for my more anime-oriented students would be like Naruto. So Naruto is that kid in orange, that one. And these kids are like kids that went to an academy to be ninjas, right? So Naruto is really loud and obnoxious and like, yeah, I mean, he's strong, I guess, but he's also kind of dumb. Compare that to Sasuke. Sasuke is the kid in blue. Sasuke is hyper intelligent and moody and is just overall stronger than Naruto for the most part for the beginning of the series until, you know, the series just fixes itself. And so Sasuke and Naruto are character foils of each other because they balance each other out. And then there's Sakura, and she's just kind of the third wheel, and she's just there. Kind of a useless character. Anyway, that's a thing. Now, moving on from your deuteragonist and character foil, because we are rambling a little bit, we're going to move on to the tritagonist, in case you need to see the word again. The tritagonist, as you probably would have guessed, is going to be the third most important character. Now, one of my students today was like, wait, can you have a quadragonist? A quadragonist? I don't even know what that word would be. Can you have a fourth most important character, or like a quintagonist? I mean, I guess you could. Yeah, why not? Sure. But remember the old rule of thumb that all good things come in threes. So, you know, at that point you have like a squad, and your squad is getting a little too big. So, you know, just think about it. Now, keep in mind, character foils can exist between all these things, and characters can move between these positions as well, depending on like what's happening in the series. I wrote down on that PowerPoint slide that the third most important character can usually be a rival for the main character. That is just kind of a maybe a trope, a stereotype, like a thing that happens in a lot of stories, where, like, think about Naruto, Sasuke. Eventually, like, if you want to treat him as the third most important character, he eventually becomes a rival for Naruto. Think about Harry Potter. You know, if you want to consider Ron the tritagonist, well, Ron eventually becomes a rival for Harry, things like that. So it just kind of depends. Next, you have the antagonist. The antagonist, I don't like it when teachers say it's the villain. No, it is the primary opposing character. No offense to any teachers watching this. No offense. I just don't like cheesy definitions like that. Okay, now it's not just the primary opposing character, it's also the primary opposing force. I really think that's important to write down, because sometimes you're going to have a movie where, like, the challenge or whatever that's affecting the plot, the thing that's causing the conflict, is not necessarily a character, but in an external force. So that might be like, think about Sharknado. Well, in Sharknado, which is literally a tornado of sharks in it, the Sharknado itself, which is a culmination of many things, is the antagonist, because it's the threat to the main characters. If you have any sort of disaster film like Twister, or, you know, 2012, like a Doomsday movie, whatever, well, the natural forces affecting the characters is the antagonist. So there you go. Okay. It has to be an opposing character or force. Make sure you have that there. Now, moving on, you also have major characters, and then you have minor characters. Major and minor. This is pretty straightforward. So think about it logically. Major characters are going to be important. Minor characters are not important. That's it. That's all that is. Magical, right? Major characters are important to the story. Minor characters are not vital to the story. They are not important to the story. Now, some of my kids sometimes ask me, but is it possible for a character to go from minor to major, or the other way around? Yes, it is totally possible, just as it is possible for characters to be antagonists and then become protagonists. That is possible. A lot of video games do that, so that's a thing. Okay, moving on here. I don't have this on the PowerPoint slide, but there's one thing that I want to talk about, which is characterization. So characterization is, that is the word that we use to describe the process or the art of building a character. So I'm going to say the art of building or designing, whatever you want to say, building a character. As the art of building a character. Okay, when you're building a character, oh yeah, I guess I forgot to mention Batman, right? So in Batman's example, one more time, Batman is going to be the protagonist, and then his two sidekicks, Robin and Nightwing, are going to be the deuteragonist and tritagonist. And just so you know, Like I said earlier, Batman is terrible at asking for help, and so those two characters are going to act as character foils for him. And then he is also a character foil for them, because where they are, like in Robin's case, you know, Robin always gets beat up, and so Batman is like the strength to counterbalance that. Nightwing lacks confidence in a lot of things. Batman gives him said confidence. So they balance each other out, right? Anyway, going back to characterization, there are two big ways to do characterization. You don't have to draw these shapes in your notebook, but I'm going to do it anyway. So the first way to kind of build a character is to have a static character or a flat character. The reason why I'm giving you two different words here is because I've seen teachers teach it either way, so I want to cover our butts by giving us both words, just to make sure we have the most detailed notes possible. So you have a flat or static character, and then you're also going to have a round or dynamic character. I'm going to draw a horrible oval around that. Actually, that's not bad. It's my best oval I've drawn today. Maybe the second best. Okay, so check this out. When you are going through the process of building a character, one of the things to consider is this. Is your character going to change? Is your character going to grow? Are they going to be challenged? All right. A flat or static character is a character who does not experience a lot of change. Character who does not grow or change. There you go. Now, a round or dynamic character is the opposite. That is a character who does experience change or growth over the story. Sorry. You could just simplify that by saying who grows, changes. There you go. Just ignore that part. Just pretend that I didn't totally mess up with pen on the page. Welcome to my videos where I don't have the ability to edit them, and things are going to get messy sometimes. That's just how it is. Okay, so a character, a round or dynamic character is a character who grows and changes. Same thing applies here. Can you have characters go from round to static, or can you have them go from dynamic to static, or can you have characters go the other way around? Yes, you can. Keep in mind that this whole thing that we just talked about is not an indication on how good or bad the character is, and it's also not an indication of like poor writing. Okay, sometimes you just have characters that have one dimension and that's all there is to them, like Professor Snape in Harry Potter. While for the most part of the series he is a static character because he's just mean to everybody, by the end of the series he becomes a dynamic character because he starts having more involvement in the plot. So keep in mind, this isn't like a quality measurement or anything. It's not a bad thing to have a static character. It just means that they don't change a lot, and that's okay. Like most major characters, most protagonists are going to be dynamic for the most part. But if they are not dynamic, then it must have a particular reason why. So we also, today in my class, we also brought up other examples of just really, really good character drama and things like that. And so one of the things that I would love to recommend would be the television series Breaking Bad. If you are allowed to watch that, Breaking Bad is a fantastic series that is basically all character growth. It's all character drama. So the whole plot of the show is that you have a high school chemistry teacher named Walter White. He is the bald guy in the picture. And Walter White is diagnosed with cancer. And so he's so kind of like mad about his former career. He doesn't really like teaching. He's mad about his former career because a lot of people that he worked with as a scientist basically burned that bridge with him. And so he doesn't want to accept their help when he's diagnosed with cancer, when they're like, okay, we'll pay for your treatments. And so Walter White teams up with Jesse Pinkman, who is I believe a high school dropout, a former student that he knew. And the two of them decide that they're going to cook illegal drugs. They're going to make methamphetamine and then sell that to make money. And so Walter goes on, like, the entire show, Breaking Bad, is literally about Walter White changing across all of these things, basically. He goes basically to every single step here. And, except deuteragonist and tritagonist, but whatever, you get my point. He goes through basically the entire shebang, and it's all about how he becomes super power hungry. Like, when he starts actually making money for the first time, it becomes hyper aggressive, and it's a really, really good show for character analysis. Now, we also talked about, let's see, what else? We talked about Thanos. We brought up One Punch Man. So One Punch Man is an interesting character study because it is an anime that is making fun of other superheroes. One Punch Man, or Saitama, is the hero there. Saitama is this guy who is quite literally the strongest superhero in the entire universe, and he wins every single fight with one punch. In fact, he looks really dopey. Like, when you see him in the show, he's just like this bald guy, right? And every now and then when he gets into a fight, he goes like super serious mode, and like his illustration changes, and like his body just gets like jacked, and like he's ready to fight and everything. But that whole show is about like a character who is so strong they're just bored. And so most of the show is like, how do we get Saitama to not show up? So yeah, there's a lot of really interesting series out there. But let's talk about villains for a second, since I have Thanos here. Take a look at this. This is something I love to show my students. Have you ever noticed that villains don't have noses? Have you ever noticed that? Some of my students were today years old when they realized that villains don't have noses. They're not allowed to have noses. It's a thing. Now, here's the reason why, in case you are thoroughly confused and you're like, I don't get it, why would they take away a nose? Maybe villains just they're so upset because they can't smell that they just turn evil. Man, that's just how it is. So anyway, think about it this way. If you have a book series like this, for example, the Red Rising series, which is amazing and all of you should read, cough cough, in Red Rising, you have a lot of time to build up your antagonist. You have a lot of time, okay? Like Red Rising, just in the first book, is roughly a 14 to 15 hour book, okay? And most of the book, I would say right up until about this point, that's like right on the chapter. Most of the book that you see here is building up the threat of the bad guy. It is building up the threat of the antagonist. And you don't actually learn anything official about the antagonist until about here. Like, that's how much left you have of the book. And so most of it is like characters dreading this huge threat, right? Now, movies don't have that luxury, okay? Movies have to communicate information extremely quickly to the audience because at most you have 2.5 hours for the most part, right? So that's why they do things like they take away facial features from villains, okay? What movie producing companies are doing is playing off of people's ability to profile other people or stereotype other people. So the reason why they have no nose is because if you take a human being and you remove a facial feature, or you give them a scar, or you disfigure them in some way, what you're doing is dehumanizing them. So they stop being human, basically. If you look at Red Skull, no offense to that guy, you look at Red Skull right here, and you watch him in a movie, murder an entire room of children, most of the audience members would be like, yeah, you look like a guy who would murder a bunch of kids. But then if you took an ordinary person and did something like that, it would be more shocking because people wouldn't expect it, right? So villains don't have noses, or they have weird colors or things like that, because you have to visually communicate right away to the audience that something is off about that person or character, whatever it may be. And by dehumanizing them, by playing on your ability to stereotype other people, and building off of your own prejudices, basically, the movie producing company is able to very quickly give you something like that. If you look at Voldemort, he's really, he's just kind of disfigured looking. Looking at Voldemort will be disturbing to some people, but when he does bad things, people will be like, yep, he looks like he's going to do a bad thing. That's just kind of how it is. Think about think about like a serial murderer drama or something like that, like a show where it's a mystery and characters are trying to figure out like who the murderer is or things like that. Most of the time when you have a show like that, it's like shocking to the audience and the characters at the end of the series when it's like, oh my God, you were the murderer all along? We never knew. It's like, right, because they looked like ordinary people and you wouldn't expect that, right? Now, sometimes the audience knows that information, the characters don't, and that's where we get the entertainment. But that's just how it is, okay? So that's why the reason why we brought up Thanos today, because people were like, well, what's wrong with Thanos? One of my students said, well, it's just because he's angry at the world because he tried shaving his face with a rake, and so his chin is all kind of funky looking, and that's why he's so angry. So, yeah, even Thanos, like Thanos' color, his size, his facial features, things like that, they dehumanize him. But, however, plot twist here, they also humanize Thanos by giving him like a sob story when he's explaining to Iron Man in Infinity War. Is it Infinity War or Endgame? Where he's explaining to Iron Man like what his past was like and why he's doing all these things. So sometimes you'll get stories where they humanize the villain in order to make you feel bad for them. That also happened, I believe, in Pirates of the Caribbean when they're talking about Davy Jones's whole like love plot and all that other stuff. Or they do it kind of a little bit to Voldemort and Harry Potter when they're like, oh, but he's an orphan. Well, he still looks like that and he still does bad things. So the audience is going to think that he's a bad guy. That's just kind of how it is. So moving on from that, the next element is point of view. So for that, characters are all done. So the next thing is point of view. All right. Don't forget that if you want to see all the notes for everything that we just talked about, I will have pictures below this video, and there will also be a recommendation section for things like character drama. Thank you for watching. I hope you found this kind of informative. Hopefully it helped you a little bit. Good luck on the next element.